Hey guys, welcome back to the series where I'm reviewing every single bike I've ever ridden. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about what could be the worst bike I've ever owned. The Transition Dirt Bag I reviewed in the last video was by no means a gem, but I think I took a step backwards before I started going forwards with my bike. And this is another free ride bike. There's a ton of funny stories related to it. And without further ado, let's jump into talking about my next bike, which was a 2011, I believe, Banshee Wildcard. Now, they call it the Wildcard because the defining feature of this bike is that you could switch in between two travel options, either 127 millimeter option or 165 millimeters of rear suspension travel. And it kind of was like two bikes in one, being like a slope style kind of free ride bike-ish or like more of a trail bike, which was cool. I think that's what attracted me to it. I also saw a really cool video. I think it was of like Matt Miles or some Canadian free rider doing cool stuff on it. So I think I was like 16 years old at the time, and like that's the stuff that was really informing my bike decisions, were what videos were like real cool on Pink Bike. So I found this frame. I sold the Transition Dirt Bag and swapped all my parts over. And I was thinking that maybe it was like going to be lighter and I could switch in between travel settings depending on if I wanted to like pedal and hit like slope styles type stuff. I think back then, like, me and my friends had this like idea that we were going to go ride slope style somewhere, and it's just like, this is so delusional. But we were really like stoked on that style of riding, and then I could, you know, put it in long travel mode and like go have it be like a downhill or like free ride style bike. Or well, that was all good in theory, but what was kind of interesting about this frame is that the geometry was kind of backwards with those travel settings. So the bike was actually steeper and shorter in the long travel setting, and it was slacker and lower in the short travel setting. It was just real awkward, and like I put it in the long travel setting and went and rode with it and was like, oh man, like this is kind of sketchy, honestly. So then I ended up just riding it in the short travel setting, which like at that point you don't even have 130 mils of travel, and like the rear suspension basically was like almost didn't work at all, but the geometry was like slightly better, and that made a bigger difference in the ride. So I just ended up riding this thing in like 130 mil travel mode all the time for everything, which was just kind of stupid, honestly. They say on the geometry chart that the head angle didn't change in between the low and the high mode, but I think that's incorrect. And they say the head angle was at 67 degrees with a longer travel fork. So that's even steeper than the Dirt Bag, and I think it could have even been steeper than that in the long travel mode. Since the BB is going up, it had to have steepened the head angle. So like in the long travel mode, I swear this thing was like unrideable. But regardless, I pressed on. You know, I hardly knew better, but it did kind of give me that first feeling of the difference in between geometry and how that can affect the handling of a bike. So that was cool, even though the handling that it resulted in wasn't that good. But it was a bike, and at that time I was progressing so fast that it really didn't matter what I was on to a certain point. It was just important that I was out there riding. And I remember practicing my tables, and they were real goony, like knee out, spread eagle tables, and you know, you really want that knee in to get that clean fold. To me, I was getting that bike flat, and how it looked really didn't matter. So I remember just like doing like quick little goony tables off of everything. But we shot my first like real video, like me and my friend Drew, for my birthday. We went up to Tahoe and like really like pushed my riding and tried to shoot like a video that we were kind of proud of. Like, I don't know, we knew we weren't the best riders, but this video, like, we really wanted to push to do some like bigger stuff. But it definitely led to some sketchy moments. Like, there's this one feature that I was hitting called the aircraft carrier, and you would jump up to this wooden bridge. Off of it was like a little kicker lip, and it was pretty decent. It was at least like a 20-foot gap, maybe 25, and like 15 feet down. And the first run, I like nose cased this thing, but like barely rode out of it somehow, like an inch or two shorter, and I would have gone straight to my face. So that was like an ultra gnarly moment, but then greased it the second time, like real sketchy air. Jumped my truck for the first time, which is like such a iconic moment for a teenager. Like, so at the time I was the head photographer of my school's yearbook, and we actually had some dope cameras, and I was in control of like what lenses and gear we would get, and I convinced them to get like this Sigma fisheye that was actually pretty expensive. We ended up taping a small DSLR camera with this like nice Sigma fisheye that was the school's lens onto my chest with like duct tape and a towel. Basically, we got really high quality POV footage of me doing like some really sketchy riding, like hitting a big road gap with it and some other stuff. But at the time, the GoPros were like pretty terrible. And the Coastal crew had posted some similar footage using a similar technique. So we were really plugged in on those internet videos at the time and wanted to try it out for ourselves. But it was the school's lens we were risking, not ours. So when I built this bike, I swapped over all my parts from my Transition dirt bag, and that took ages. I had no idea what I was doing, but when I finally put it together, I think I put a new fork on it. It was an X-Fusion Vengeance that replaced the domain I had. And pretty early on in me riding this thing, I ended up snapping the arch on the fork somehow. Like, it was making a bunch of noise, and I looked down and it was like just cracked all the way through. I think X-Fusion had some quality issues early on, and I actually had a bunch of different forks on this bike as well. I had a Lyric U-turn coil as well as a Lyric two-step air. I ended up running the coil more, I think, and it was pretty cool. It's incrementally adjustable, like millimeter by millimeter. You would like wind the fork all the way down and wind it back up. I think it went between like 140 and 160, or it could have even gone lower. But when I was hitting jumps and stuff, I would lower it down, and when I was riding trails, I would put it up. So that fork was pretty cool. So why I say it could be the worst bike I've ever owned is just that it really wasn't that good at anything. The whole Wildcard thing was like interesting and what drew me to the bike, but it just wasn't executed very well, with like the geometry being kind of backwards of what it should be. And that just made the bike like versatile, I guess, but just not good at anything. And at least the dirt bag had a little bit more suspension travel and was a little bit more confidence inspiring, but this bike was like even shorter and sketchier. The suspension didn't work as good, and I just ended up riding like a 127 mil travel bike on downhill trails, and that just didn't end up being that good of a fit. So I ended up selling the bike as a complete. When I sold it, the Azonic Outlaws I put on to replace the old Transition wheel set were just absolutely clapped. You can see in the picture that there's a massive flat spot. Like, it's clearly visible. The wheel looks like a square, but I think I ended up selling that bike for around $1,400. And then that money with a bit of savings allowed me to buy my next bike, which was definitely an upgrade and kind of a step in the right direction. So that's my review on the Banshee Wildcard. Again, a really funny time and funny era of bikes, having these like single crown freeride bikes or like slope style bikes that me and my friends are super into for some reason, but kind of started moving in a more reasonable direction after this. More performance and more technical reviews coming on the bikes that were kind of better in those areas. What I mainly have to say about these old freeride bikes is that they were really sketchy, and there's not a whole lot more than that. So I hope you like the video. Subscribe if you'd like, and in the next video we'll be reviewing my next bike, which will be a Scott Voltage freeride. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good day.